This episode is brought to you by my favorite sponsor, CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of nonfiction movies and shows from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. It has millions of subscribers and new shows every week on history, science, tech, military history, and, of course, true crime. And it's extremely affordable at under $20 a year. For those of you who are interested, I can recommend a few titles, like Murder Maps, a drama doc-series that takes you back in time to the most shocking and surprising murder cases in history, or The Man Nobody Knew, about the hidden life of legendary CIA spy master William Colby. The consummate American soldier spy, Colby took on the government's dirtiest assignments without question, until the day he defied presidential orders and revealed to Congress the CIA's family jewels. I also like the Curious Minds series on terrorism and espionage. CuriosityStream is available worldwide on their web app, Roku, Android, Xbox One, smart TVs, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle, and Apple TV. So go to curiositystream.com/skd for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and nonfiction series. Use promo code SKD and you'll save 25%. That's only $14.99 a year. It's basically what I pay on Netflix per month. At $1.25 per month, you actually owe me a like on the video for this deal. Now let's get back to Peeping Tom's serial killers and all the good stuff. Pam Kinnemore left work on a Friday evening, July 12, 2002. A mother, decorator, and antique dealer, Pam owned her own business called Comforts and Joys in Denham Springs, Louisiana. When her husband came home from work later that evening, Pam's car was there, but she was not. He waited for her to show up, but became worried as time passed. It was not like her to disappear without saying where she was going. Later that evening, he called the police and reported her missing. Police investigators did not initially suspect foul play. Perhaps she'd forgotten to tell her husband that she had made other plans that evening, or maybe there was an emergency with a family member. As the days passed, however, foul play became more likely. Shortly after her disappearance, Pam's family posted billboards with an award of $75,000 for her safe return and any information concerning her whereabouts. They were beginning to fear the worst-case scenario and prayed she would be found alive. Their hopes were dashed 5 days after she was reported missing. A state survey crew working near Whiskey Bay Bridge discovered a gruesome site on July 16, 2002. Located on the boundary line between Baton Rouge and Lafayette, in a marshy area of the woods beneath the bridge, they noticed a human-like figure lying at the water's edge. As they approached, they discovered it was the nude body of a dead woman. It was Pam Kinnemore. Her remains were sent to the Orleans Parish Coroner's Office, where an autopsy was conducted. She had died from gash wounds to the neck, believed to have been made by a knife. She had non-consensual sex. Police learned that Kinnemore's death bore similarities to 2 other murdered women found in the same general area months earlier. Investigators suspected that, on the night of her disappearance, the killer found his way into the Kinnemore family home at 8338 Briarwood Place in Baton Rouge and abducted Pam. Because there was no sign of forced entry, police believe she trustingly led the killer in, or he entered through an unlocked window or door. At the time her body was discovered, it appeared as if the killer had taken a trophy of his victim. A plain silver toe ring that Kinnemore almost always wore had been removed from her body. Investigators believe the ring, if found, could be valuable evidence linking the killer to Kinnemore. 1 week after the discovery of Kinnemore's body, police learned some important information. A woman came forward claiming that she may have seen Kinnemore's body in an unidentified pickup truck on the night of her disappearance. According to the witness, who remained under police protection for fear of her life, she saw a man driving westbound on I-10 in a white pickup truck at about 3 a.m. She claimed there was a woman fitting Kinnemore's description slumped in the passenger seat. She appeared to be sleeping or dead. The witness glimpsed a white male driver, who she described as slight in build. She noticed the truck getting off at the Whiskey Bay exit, close to where Kinnemore's remains were later found. She immediately contacted the police when she realized that there may have been a connection between the man and woman in the truck and the disappearance of Kinnemore. A statement from the police concerning the suspicious vehicle was released after more details surfaced. Police were looking for a white General Motors, probably a Chevy pickup truck, and possibly a 1996 or 1997 single cab model. The witness claimed to have seen the symbol of a fish on the rear left side part of the truck. Investigators believe the license plate may contain JT341. The state of origin of the license plate remains unknown. The police suspected that the same truck and driver were connected to the non-consensual sex case of a 28-year-old Mississippi woman 2 days after Kinnamore went missing. The woman told police that she was stopped by a man in a white truck fitting the description of the one seen on the night of Kinnamore's disappearance. She was coerced into the vehicle on I-10 and had non-consensual sex before being let go. The police released a composite of the man in July 2002 based on the witness's information. Investigators working on the Kinnamore murder case began looking for more similarities between Pam Kinnamore's death and the earlier murders of the 2 other women. Investigators set out to match DNA samples taken from the 3 cases. As police searched, they discovered mounting evidence that suggested Kinnamore was not the killer's first victim, nor would she be his last. One of the first victims known to die at the hands of the Baton Rouge serial killer was 41-year-old Gina Wilson Green. She was a nurse and office manager for Home Infusion Network. Her body was found at her home on Stanford Avenue in Baton Rouge on September 23, 2001. The divorcee lived alone in an apartment near Louisiana State University, LSU. An autopsy report stated that she had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation at about 9 a.m. Police discovered that several items were stolen from her home, including a cloth purse and a Nokia cellular phone. The purse was never found, but the phone was later recovered across town in an alley. 8 months later, the body of another woman was found in her townhouse on Charlot Avenue in Baton Rouge. The remains were of a 22-year-old LSU graduate named Charlotte Murray Pace. A roommate discovered her body at about 2 p.m. on May 31, 2002. She had been stabbed to death. Evidence showed the victim put up a fierce struggle before succumbing to her wounds. It was likely that her killer was also wounded during the attack. Like in Green's case, an autopsy showed evidence of non-consensual sex. Pace had recently moved before her death and lived for only 2 days at the house where her body was discovered. Her previous address was only 3 doors away from Gina Green. Investigators found no evidence that they ever knew each other. Several items were missing from Charlotte's possession. According to police reports, a brown and tan Louis Vuitton wallet with keys to Pace's BMW was stolen. The wallet contained her driver's license, as well as other personal effects. A VTech cellular phone and a silver ring were also taken. The killer did leave behind one thing police hoped would lead them to the identity of the killer: a footprint. In August 2002, a task force was formed of 40 investigators from various law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, the Baton Rouge Police Department, the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office, the Louisiana State Police, the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office, and the Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office, among others. The multi-agency homicide task force was formed to establish a clearer line of communication among the bureaus. They believed this could help them share information better and catch the killer more quickly. Samples from the Pace crime scene were genetically compared with samples from the Green crime scene. DNA evidence indicated that the same man murdered the 2 women. Months later, the Louisiana State Crime Lab was also able to link Kinnamore's death to the same killer. Investigators continued to compare DNA samples of the killer with samples taken from several dozen unsolved murder cases over the last decade. They hoped to be able to obtain enough information so that the murderer, if caught, would be put behind bars for a long time. There was no doubt that Baton Rouge had a serial killer on the loose. By September 2002, the task force released more information concerning the footprint discovered at the murder scene of Charlotte Pace. A Rawlings brand athletic shoe made the print. The shoe, a men's size 10 or 11, was easier to identify because of its unique sole. It was a brand commonly sold at local discount stores. That month, the task force also released the detailed testimony of a woman who had an unusual encounter with a man outside a Winn-Dixie food store in mid-August. She was packing her groceries when the stranger approached her and began to question what she was doing. The man, carrying a jug of water, then followed her out of the store into the empty parking lot, chatting to her all the while. He mentioned his name was Joe and that he worked in construction. He then told her he could lift her up, although she was a large woman. Joe asked her to go out with them that night and was disappointed when she refused. The unusually persistent man said he wanted to get her a gift from his vehicle. He walked toward a large white truck that appeared to the woman to match the one connected with the murders. From his truck, he retrieved a tree vine and gave it to her. The woman was petrified and went to her car to wait for the man to leave. Shortly after the man drove off, she contacted the police. During an interview with the police, the woman was shown a sketch of a man suspected to have been involved in the killings. She said he looked just like Joe. However, the composite did not match that obtained by the Mississippi woman who had non-consensual sex with a man in a white truck 2 days following Kinnemore's disappearance. Nevertheless, investigators seized on the new evidence. Investigators analyzed surveillance videos of the parking lot, but it's unclear if the man was the suspect they sought. On November 21, 2002, a 23-year-old female Marine named Tanisha Dean Colomb disappeared. At about 1:30 p.m. that day, her black 1994 Mazda MX-3 was found with the keys in the ignition on Robbie Road in Grand Coteau. However, Colomb was nowhere in sight. 3 days later, a rabbit hunter discovered the nude remains of Colomb several hundred yards off the roadside in a wooded area of St. Landry Parish. Her body was found 30 miles from where her car had been discovered several days earlier. Medical examiners said she had been bludgeoned to death. Colomb had strongly resisted her attacker before she died. Task Force investigators further revealed 1 month after her death that DNA evidence linked Colomb with the Pace, Green, and Kinnemore murders. She was to be the Baton Rouge serial killer's first known black victim and the first to be found outside the Baton Rouge area. Following Colomb's murder, FBI and task force investigators were able to provide the public with a more detailed investigative analysis of the killer and his behavior. They compiled a personality profile of the murderer based on information from similar crimes that occurred nationally and the specific details of the 4 recent crimes. According to investigators, the public release of a behavioral profile is an uncommon practice. However, the task force believed that informing the public might lead to more people coming forward with knowledge about the killer. The profile suggested the killer was male, between 25 and 35 years old. They believed he might be physically strong due to his ability to lift the bodies of the deceased women and carry them over unstable terrains, such as extremely muddy areas. He probably worked in a job that required such strength. Investigators believed it was highly likely the killer earned a below-average to average income. He probably worked in a position that required little social interaction with other people. There was evidence to suggest the murderer was able to obtain information on his victims before he abducted them. It appeared he had knowledge concerning the women's lifestyles and schedules and may have stalked them. Moreover, the 4 murders were probably planned, even though the killer showed signs of impulsivity. The behavioral analysis also suggested the killer was insecure and had difficulty interacting with women, especially those who portrayed themselves as sophisticated. Women he approached might have described him as being awkward but harmless. He may have crossed the line with some of the women he knew, those in whom he developed an intense interest. FBI profilers believe the offender likely displayed intense anger, anxiousness, irritation, and preoccupation with the news concerning the victims and any recent breakthrough discoveries relating to the cases. He may have even verbally renounced any investigative leads and blamed the victims for their deaths. In December 2002, task force investigators revealed a new lead in the case. They released a composite sketch of a man task force investigators called a person of interest. He's about 35 years old and white. The person was purportedly seen in a white pickup truck in the area where Colomb's body was discovered on the same day and around the same time she went missing. The truck allegedly matched the description of the one seen in connection with the murder of Kinnemore. That same month, the task force told the public that it would be collecting DNA samples from approximately 100 potential suspects. The suspects were asked to voluntarily submit saliva samples obtained from a brisk swabbing of the mouth or scraping of the cheeks. 1 month earlier, 600 men had been asked to provide such samples. Those who refused to comply were further investigated and were said to have received some pressure from investigators until they willingly volunteered. Public fears climbed steadily. Gun and pepper spray sales had greatly increased in the area, as well as enrollment in self-defense classes. Even student class attendance at LSU slightly decreased because of fears of being abducted and murdered by the Baton Rouge serial killer. Investigators realized that if they didn't catch the killer soon, panic might ensue. In January 2003, the task force announced a new major development in the Baton Rouge killer case. It found another shoe print, allegedly from the killer, in the vicinity of Colomb's body. It was the second shoe print to be found in connection with the killer. The first print was found at the murder scene of Charlotte Pace. The shoe size was the same in both instances, a men's 10 to 11. The shoe print was made by a pair of $40 2002 model Adidas-type basketball shoes, likely purchased in the area. Investigators also revealed that one of Column's possessions was missing at the time of her death. The information was released in hopes that someone would come forward with information about the suspect. Investigators believed the chances of catching the killer were becoming more likely with every new piece of evidence. In 2002, task force investigators began using electric billboards to run ads about the killer. The billboards, provided by a local company called Lamar Advertising, were used to display up-to-date information concerning the murders, including the white truck and a composite of the suspect. The number of billboards increased from 2 to 6 in 2003, covering the Lafayette and Baton Rouge areas. Investigators were looking for the best means possible to keep the public informed in the hopes it would lead to the killer's capture and the prevention of further deaths. As the investigation reached its 1.5-year mark, it began to receive harsh criticism. One of the most vocal critics was the author and criminologist Dr. Robert Keppel, known for his unique approach used to investigate serial killers, such as Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer. During an interview in February 2003, Keppel focused on 4 major mistakes made by the task force. Keppel first suggested that there was a great possibility that the murderer's name was already in the task force's possession, but could easily get overlooked in the files, especially with such a flood of information coming in. Police often obtain the name of a killer within the first 30 days of an investigation, Keppel said. Keppel also criticized the task force for revealing the DNA link between the victims, saying it might hinder the investigation. He said it increased the likelihood that the killer might take greater care in leaving behind genetic evidence at the scene of future crimes. Keppel further stated that the public release of information concerning the shoes might also cause the killer to destroy them, making the murders more difficult to connect with him if ever caught. Moreover, he criticized the psychological profile, explaining that it only adds to information overload and takes away valuable time from the investigation. In his opinion, the only useful knowledge released by the task force was the composite sketch of the leading suspect and the information about the truck. In the interview, Keppel explained that it would be in the investigation's best interest not to focus on unusual characters that might stand out, but on someone who blends in and is usually there. On March 3, 2003, 26-year-old Carrie Lynn Yoder, a doctoral student at LSU, went missing from her home at 2450 Dodson Avenue. She lived only a few miles from Gina Green and Charlotte Pace's home. Like Column, she lived alone. Her boyfriend of 3 years, Lee Stanton, reported her missing to police 2 days after she failed to contact him. Stanton told police he had last talked to Yoder on March 3rd, and she told him she was going to the Winn-Dixie grocery store on Burbank Drive. They made plans to talk that night or the following day, but when he did not hear from her, he began to worry. The next day, he went to check on her and noticed that her car was there and the lights were on in the house, but he did not go in. On March 5th, after still no contact, he decided to return to her house and look inside. He noticed that her keys, cellular phone, and purse were on the counter and the back door was open. It was then that he began to realize that something was terribly wrong. He immediately called the police. Stanton found everything else in the house appeared normal except for the wall-mounted key holder by the front door, which was dangling by one screw as if knocked off its hinges by force. He suggested there could have been a struggle in that area, but police did not suspect foul play. Police removed items from Yoder's home and took them to be analyzed at the crime lab. The items included her personal computer, her car, and the front door. They hoped to find fingerprints, messages, fibers, or other evidence. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that Yoder had indeed returned from the grocery store and had been home for several hours before she disappeared. Police intensely investigated her home and the surrounding area. They conducted a search using helicopters in the hopes that an aerial position might make it easier to locate her. Investigators also handed out questionnaires at the Winn-Dixie, looking for any information concerning her whereabouts. On March 13, 2003, Carrie Yoder's family and friends were confronted with their worst fears. On a rainy day, a man fishing in the Atchafalaya River Basin discovered Yoder's badly beaten body near the Whiskey Bay Bridge. She was found in the water near where Kinnamore's body had been discovered some 8 months earlier. According to medical examiners, she had died from strangulation. Moreover, it was determined that she had struggled with her killer before being asphyxiated. 1 week after her death, investigators initially claimed that there was no known link between her murder and the Baton Rouge serial killer. However, after DNA tests made from samples from the scene, she was proven to be the killer's 5th victim. Local organizations and individuals throughout Louisiana were shocked at the rash of deaths at the hand of the same person. The residents of southern Louisiana were living in daily fear that they might be the killer's next victim. Many people and area organizations donated substantial funds towards a reward for information into the arrest and conviction of the serial killer. On March 17, 2003, the friends and family of some of the victims rallied on the steps of the Louisiana state capitol, demanding an end to the murders. They had had enough of the senseless loss of lives. Something more had to be done. A North Carolina investigative psychologist named Dr. Maurice Godwin claimed to have critical evidence concerning the murders. Godwin said he had constructed a geographical profile containing the places where the victims disappeared and where their bodies were discovered. He found that the crime scenes formed a triangular shape pattern on a map, which he believed pinpointed the area where the killer lived. Godwin claimed he presented his unique findings to task force investigators months before Yoder's death, but they showed no interest in his discovery. Godwin further claimed he was able to predict where the next murder would take place. Intriguingly, Yoder was abducted and found within the triangular-shaped pattern revealed by Godwin. In some respects, Godwin's theory agrees with one aspect of the profile, concerning the theory that the murders could have been planned. It was not a coincidence that Yoder was abducted from the same area where Pace and Green were murdered. Moreover, it was not a coincidence that her remains were discovered in the same vicinity as Kinnamore's. Near the end of March, the task force released important new information. The task force stated the public should no longer focus primarily on the latest sketches of the subject previously released by investigators, but on a person of any race. Moreover, the public should also be on the lookout for more than just the white truck, but any vehicle that might seem suspicious. The new information suggested that the sketch of the person of interest might not be directly related to the murders. The change in focus came after research and investigation into Carrie Yoder's case, specifically when talking with witnesses in the area. Another possible breakthrough in the case came to the public's attention just days after the task force's change of focus. A jogger found a letter addressed to Yoder several blocks from her home. Intriguingly, the letter was found on the same street where victims Gina Green and Charlotte Pace had once lived before their deaths. On April 8, 2003, the task force claimed another victim might be added to the growing list. 52-year-old prostitute Lillian Robinson from St. Martin, Louisiana, disappeared in January 2002. Robinson's niece was the last known person to see her alive. 1 month later, on February 10th, a fisherman had discovered Robinson's nude body floating in the waters of the Atchafalaya River, close to Whiskey Bay Bridge. She was found in the same vicinity where Kinnamore and Yoder were later found. According to police, Robinson's remains were in an advanced state of decomposition when found, due to the fact that she'd been in the water for nearly 1 week. This made it virtually impossible to extract adequate DNA samples from her body, which could connect her with the killer. She had been murdered in a similar manner as the other victims who were linked to the Baton Rouge killer. Evidence concerning Robinson's case was handed over to the task force in the hopes that a connection could be made between her death and that of the 5 murdered women. Task force investigators were also looking into the alleged abduction of another woman who may have fallen victim to the Baton Rouge serial killer. 31-year-old mother of 2 and nurse, Melinda McGee, disappeared from her home in Altmore, Alabama on March 24, 2003. Although she lived 250 miles from Baton Rouge, evidence found at her home suggested she was abducted by the same man. McGee called her husband and mother from her job at a nursing home before 8:30 a.m. on the morning of her disappearance. It was the last they ever heard from her. Sometime after she arrived home from work, it was believed she was abducted. The local police said that there was evidence of a struggle in the McGee home, but no clues suggesting that there was a homicide. Moreover, there was not enough evidence available in which DNA samples could be drawn. Police said there were similarities between McGee's disappearance and those of Kinnamore and Yoder. McGee has not been heard of since her disappearance, and no body has yet been found. Robinson and McGee were not the only other potential victims of the Baton Rouge serial killer. In May 2002, a 23-year-old LSU student, Christine Moore, left home in her car to go jogging at a park and never returned. Like in the Colombe case, Moore's car was found abandoned near River Road in Baton Rouge. Her body was found the following month on a dirt road in Iberville Parish, Louisiana. Medical examiners claim she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Although her murder was never officially recognized by the task force as connected to the Baton Rouge serial killer, there remain similarities between her case and those of some of his other victims. The police were checking 3 incidents the previous year in which a disarmingly attractive young black man either attacked or tried to attack women in St. Martin Parish. None of the 3 victims were killed. A new computer sketch was released showing a light-skinned black man. He was described as clean-cut, personable, and distinctly handsome. The man tried to charm his victims, said his name was Anthony, and behaved initially in a non-threatening manner. Previously, the Baton Rouge serial killer was thought to be white. During the last week of May 2003, DNA swabs taken from a West Feliciana Parish man who resembled the most recent composite of the suspect were rushed to the crime labs for analysis. It didn't take long for the lab technician to process the samples to realize that there was a positive match between the suspect's DNA and samples taken from Carrie Lynn Yoder. Technicians were able to further link the suspect to 3 more murders attributed to the suspected Baton Rouge serial killer. After many long months, investigators finally had their key suspect, 34-year-old Derrick Todd Lee. On May 26, 2003, police issued an arrest warrant for Lee, who fled to Chicago and then Atlanta in an effort to escape murder charges. At the time the warrant was issued, he and his family had been gone for approximately 3 weeks. Police learned that on the day Lee voluntarily provided a DNA sample, his wife Jacqueline withdrew their young son and daughter from school, claiming they were moving to Los Angeles. The couple then quickly packed up their belongings and abandoned their brown brick ranch-style house on 4273 US 61 in St. Francisville of West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana. On May 27, 2003, Atlanta police working with a joint FBI Metropolitan Atlanta task force apprehended Lee at a hotel where he was lodging. Lee waived extradition and was flown back to Louisiana the following day. Initially, he was charged with only Carrie Lynn Yoder's murder. However, by early June, he was also accused of the murders of Green, Pace, Kinnamore, and Columb based on DNA evidence linking him to the crimes. During the investigation into Lee, the police learned that he had an extensive criminal history. Lee's youthful record included a string of juvenile offenses that stretched back to 1984, when he was caught peeping into the home of a St. Francisville woman. It would mark the first of many such offenses. Lee never really outgrew his teenage fetish. As Lee grew older, his rap sheet became more extended, including arrests for attempted first-degree murder, stalking, peeping into homes, as well as break-in and burglary, among other crimes. Lee's arrests and related incidents between 1992 and 2001 were as follows. November 1992, Lee was arrested for illegal entry and burglary of Zachary resident Bob Benji's house. January 1993, Lee and his accomplice, Thomas Whitaker Jr., were arrested for breaking into the home of 73-year-old Melvin Foster, whom they beat with a stick and robbed. July 1993, Lee was sentenced to 1 year in prison for burglary. September 1995, Lee was arrested for a peeping incident and resisting arrest after being chased and caught by police after looking in the window of a woman. During the same month, Lee was arrested again for stealing from a Salvation Army thrift store. August 1997, Lee was arrested after being caught looking into the windows of a woman. August 1999, Lee was arrested after being caught in a woman's residence uninvited for being a peeping Tom and stalking. December 1999, received a suspended sentence on a misdemeanor stalking charge. January 2000, accused of attempted first-degree murder after severely kicking and stomping his girlfriend Cassandra Green at a bar after an argument over Lee's advances towards another woman. While trying to flee from the police following the incident, he allegedly tried to run over the sheriff's deputy with a car. Lee was sentenced to 2 years for the incident. September 2001, Lee was arrested for battery against his wife, but charges were later dismissed. Following the release of Lee's vast criminal history, residents of Baton Rouge were shocked that he was never suspected in the Baton Rouge murders, especially when the focus was changed to a man of color in March of 2003. Moreover, the task force was heavily criticized because Lee had been overlooked after having been brought to their attention by the Zachary Police Department in 2002. The Zachary police suspected Lee of the murder of 41-year-old Connie Warner in 1992 and the disappearance of 20-year-old Randy Meebrewer in 1998. Despite the mistakes made in the case, the task force was congratulated for their work in catching the killer. After Lee had been taken into police custody, the police, with the help of the FBI, immediately were focusing on trying to locate his estranged wife Jacqueline and the couple's 2 children. It was hoped that Jacqueline might be able to provide clues into Lee's behavior and whereabouts during the crimes. Family members suspected she was hiding out of fear. Family members of Jacqueline Denise Lee claimed that she lived in denial of her husband's transgressions, which included stalking, peeping into windows, and infidelity. Jacqueline's aunt claimed she was afraid of her husband, and at one point, against her wishes, he had a mistress move into their home. Initially, Jacqueline and the couple's 2 children could not be traced. Eventually, in June 2003, the FBI located the 3 in Chicago. Investigators were interested in Jacqueline not only for questioning purposes, but also because they needed her consent before they could begin digging up the property of her former residence. Police had been anonymously tipped off that Lee had possibly buried a body beneath a concrete slab, and they were waiting to either confirm or deny the rumors as soon as possible. Investigators finally obtained permission from Jacqueline to dig at their home in the search for clues. 2 other sites were also excavated by police in the hopes of obtaining more information into the murders and disappearance of a Zachary woman. One of the sites included the former home of Lee's mistress, Cassandra Green. Lee had been seen pouring a concrete slab in the driveway of her home in the middle of the night, only a couple of days following Randy Meebrewer's disappearance from her Zachary residence in 1998. During the excavation at Green's previous home, a woman's bracelet of unknown ownership had been discovered. However, investigators were unable to find any evidence of human remains in any of the 3 sites. Investigators had also been looking for more clues into Lee's alleged involvement in the murders by searching a white pickup truck sold to a relative of Green's by Lee. In late May, police seized the pickup once owned by Lee from Cassandra Green's uncle, which was taken to the police crime lab for analysis. A similar truck had been previously connected with some of the crimes attributed to the Baton Rouge serial killer. However, there had been a discrepancy concerning the race and build of the driver, as viewed by earlier witnesses in the investigation, compared with that of Lee's. Such contradictory data had caused investigators to throw doubt on the reliability of earlier testimony concerning the white truck and its connection with the murders. Investigators continued to examine other murders that could have been committed by Lee. The police in Bolton, Mississippi, sought to tie Lee, a former truck driver, to the murders of 4 women found near a truck stop. Lee was now considered the prime suspect in the 1992 murder of Connie Warner and in the 1998 murder of Randy Meebrewer, both of whom were residents of Zachary, Louisiana. As of mid-June 2003, Lee had been held without bond at Parish Prison in Louisiana. Public Defender Mike Mitchell, 52, had been appointed to head Lee's defense team during his upcoming hearing. It was suspected that the defense's case would hinge on the reliability of DNA evidence taken from Lee and that obtained from the crime scenes. Prosecutors John Sinkfield and Dana Cummings would be trying the case against Lee. It was suspected that Baton Rouge District Attorney Doug Moreau would seek the death penalty if Lee was found guilty. Until then, Derrick Lee's fate would remain hanging in the balance. Derrick Todd Lee's life was very different now that he lived in one of the 2 isolation cells in the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison. The other isolation cell prisoner was Booker T. Williams, Jr., accused of murder. Lee was separated from the general prison population, standard procedure for high-profile sexual crimes, to ensure that he was not attacked by another prisoner. Like other prisoners in isolation cells, Lee got 25 minutes out of his cell each day. He got no television, but had access to his newspaper every day. Every 60 days, he was allowed 3 hours in the prison recreation yard. Lee could have visitors, but only 3 of them, and they could only come on Wednesdays and speak to him by phone. Lee's most frequent visitor was his mother, but other family members may have come as well. Lee's case, which had been estimated to require some $800,000 in defense expenses, had created a burden for the overworked and understaffed public defender's office. In early September 2003, prosecutors revealed that some witnesses claimed that they saw Lee at the scene of the murder of Charlotte Murray Pace on May 31, 2002. Chris Villemarette and Karen Savoie told a national television program that they saw Lee outside Pace's home the day she was killed. However, the description of the man they saw does not clearly fit Derrick Todd Lee. On Wednesday, September 24, 2003, Lee was formally indicted with the first-degree murder of Tanisha Dene Colombe of Lafayette, Louisiana. Around the same time, DNA tests failed to show a link between Lee and the murder of Connie Warner of Zachary, Louisiana. Lee was formally charged with the attempted murder of a Breaux Bridge woman. Lee was looking at a sentence of 100 years for those crimes, if convicted. On October 14, 2003, Lee pleaded innocent to the first-degree murder charge in Lafayette concerning the death of Tanisha Colomb. He also pleaded innocent to the murder of an unnamed Breaux Bridge woman. Lynn Marino, the mother of Baton Rouge victim Pam Kinamore, commented on the testimony of the Breaux Bridge woman whose skull had been fractured. She wants everyone to know how vicious he was. They didn't expect her to live. A St. Francisville woman had given Lee's name to authorities months before the last two victims were slain. The woman had been stalked by Lee for 2 years. Lee's name had been passed on to the task force, but the implication is that it was not followed up on because the task force was only looking for a white man. Prosecutors, who were seeking the death penalty for Derrick Todd Lee, suggested that they had DNA evidence that linked Lee to 7 murders. The women Lee was charged with killing included Gina Green, Charlotte Pace, Tanisha Colomb, Pam Kinamore, Carrie Yoder, Randy Meebrewer, who was linked by DNA to Lee in February 2004, and Geralyn DeSoto, 21, who was found beaten and stabbed to death on January 14, 2002 at her Addis, Louisiana mobile home. During a January 2004 hearing into the murder of Charlotte Murray Pace, lead prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney John Sinkefield, sought permission to combine all the evidence from the other cases to use in the upcoming trial scheduled for May. State law allows prosecutors to use evidence from other crimes if they can convince a judge that those offenses are similar enough to the ones being tried to constitute a pattern. Another key piece of evidence that prosecutors hoped to use during the trial was the testimony from Diane Alexander, a Breaux Bridge nurse who testified at the hearing that Lee beat, attempted to have non-consensual sex, and strangle her at her home in 2002. Alexander would have likely been killed had her son not arrived at the trailer during the attack and frightened Lee away. Despite the evidence, Lee continued to plead innocent to all of the charges. In May 2004, a state appeals court ruled that combined evidence from the cases was admissible at Pace's trial, which was delayed several months. The evidence included DNA links to the victims, as well as Alexander's testimony. The decision angered Lee's lawyers, who believed that the evidence was improperly obtained because police used a subpoena instead of a search warrant. In the meantime, Lee's trial for the DeSoto murder was scheduled to take place in August 2004. State Attorney Tony Clayton was prosecuting him for second-degree murder because he couldn't prove an underlying felony, such as forced entry or non-consensual sex, which is required for a first-degree charge in Louisiana. Prosecutors plan to use evidence from other crimes attributed to Lee, including evidence from the Colomb case and the attack on Alexander. Lee's attorney, Tommy Thompson, argued to delay the trial because he wasn't granted enough time or money to properly prepare for the case or review the evidence given to him by prosecutors. However, his plea was denied by the state Supreme Court. On August 5, 2004, Derrick Todd Lee's trial into the murder of Geralyn DeSoto began in Port Allen, Louisiana. One of the first witnesses to be heard by the 6-man, 6-woman jury and District Judge Robin Free was Lee's last victim, Diane Alexander. Alexander pointed to Lee and said during her testimony, "While my eyes were closed, I did not forget your face." She had been beaten so severely during the July 2002 attack that her eyes were swollen shut. Alexander was one of several witnesses to testify against Lee that day. On August 6, 2004, Lee interrupted the testimony of the coroner who examined DeSoto's remains to ask the judge to fire his court-appointed lawyer. Lee told the judge, "My life is on the line here," and that he wanted DeSoto's parents to find out the truth about what happened to their daughter. Lee claimed that his lawyer lied to him and did not represent him properly. However, Lee and his lawyer were able to solve their problems, and Tommy Thompson continued to represent him during the remainder of the trial. Another of the more riveting moments of the trial came when DeSoto's husband, Darren, testified to how he found his wife's body. Darren came home and found his wife lying on their bed in a pool of blood. He was quoted in an article as saying, "I turned her head a little bit, and at that moment I saw her throat was cut wide open." There's no doubt that his testimony made a lasting impression on the jury. Just 4 days later, the jury deliberated. It took the jury just an hour and 40 minutes to come to a verdict. On August 8, 2004, 11 of the 12 jurors found Lee guilty of second-degree murder in the case of Geralyn DeSoto. 6 days later, Judge Free sentenced Lee to life in Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola without the benefit of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. During sentencing, DeSoto's family confronted Lee about the murder of their daughter. DeSoto's father, John Barr, locked eyes with Lee and told him, "You don't know how bad I want to get a little closer to you." He was further quoted as saying, "Thank God my daughter gave her soul to Christ before you took it. We know where your soul is going." Lee's trial for the murder of Charlotte Pace was scheduled for September 2004, where he faced first-degree murder charges. Lee also faced trial on November 3rd for the attempted murder of Diane Alexander and faced another trial in 2005 for the slaying of Tanisha Colomb. Other trials were expected to follow. In September 2004, Derrick Todd Lee faced a second murder trial, this time for the brutal murder of Charlotte Murray Pace, 22, who had been beaten then stabbed to death with a screwdriver and a knife at her home in 2002. 1 month earlier, at the DeSoto murder trial, the prosecution decided not to go after the death sentence because they couldn't prove the required aggravating circumstances, such as non-consensual sex committed with murder, to secure a death sentence. However, Lee's second trial for Pace's murder was different and of specific interest to the families of the murdered victims because for the first time, he faced the death penalty by lethal injection. Realizing this, the defense team, led by Mike Mitchell and Nelville Hollingsworth, made every effort to make sure Lee got a fair trial. Initially, they argued to have the trial moved to another location and have the pool of potential jurors tossed out because of concerns that the ceaseless media coverage of the murders and Lee's arrest would bias the jury. However, State District Judge Richard Anderson, who was presiding over the case, rejected the defense's arguments, believing that it would indeed be possible to find an unbiased jury. After some delays, the trial finally went ahead. The prosecution team, headed by John Sinkfield and Dana Cummings, began their arguments by linking DNA samples taken from Lee with those found at the crime scene. Cummings suggested that DNA, which she referred to as the silent witness, could actually identify someone so particularly, so reliably, so exactly that it was irrefutable evidence. In fact, police DNA expert Julian Naylor took the stand and stated that Lee's genetic profile was so rare that statistically there was a 1 in 3.6 quadrillion, or 1,000 trillion, chance that the DNA would match any randomly selected person. In response to the genetic evidence, the defense questioned the methods used to collect DNA samples and the accuracy of the analysis conducted by an unaccredited lab, finding it inaccurate and unacceptable. The prosecution also tried to link Lee to the murders of Pam Kinnamore and Carrie Yoder, whose murders both marked similarities to Pace's. They presented DNA evidence taken from Lee that matched samples found at the crime scenes of all 3 victims. Moreover, the prosecution revealed that all victims exhibited similar bruising on their arms and hands, as well as neck injuries, which they likely received while trying to protect themselves during the struggle. All 3 women had non-consensual sex before being killed. The defense retorted by questioning other items at the scene that were neither linked to Lee nor the victims, suggesting that someone else was responsible for the crime. Interestingly, the defense did not present their own witnesses to support their arguments, but instead relied on cross-examining the prosecution's. One such witness that took the stand was Diane Alexander, who allegedly survived an attack by Lee in 2002. She told jurors her harrowing account of how Lee beat and attempted to have non-consensual sex with her before being scared off by her son. Even though the defense questioned her memory of the event, Alexander stuck to her story, stating that she had never taken her eyes off of Lee and that she clearly remembered the attack. Alexander's testimony, coupled with the forensic evidence, proved to have a significant impact on the jury. On October 12, 2004, after deliberating for just 80 minutes, jurors returned their verdict, finding Lee guilty of first-degree murder. Pace's mother, Anne, broke down crying after the verdict was read. Her daughter somewhere must be real proud that it happened this way. There's evil in the world, and he is the personification of that. The next step that Lee had to face was the penalty hearing, in which the decision would be made concerning whether he would live or die. During the penalty hearing, jurors listened to conflicting statements made by mental health professionals concerning Lee's intelligence. According to the Supreme Court, a mentally retarded convict with an IQ below 70 must be exempted from the death penalty. Testimony by expert witnesses presented by the defense claimed that Lee was indeed retarded with an IQ of between 62 and 65, making it difficult for him to understand the seriousness of his crimes. However, expert witnesses for the prosecution stated that Lee was not mentally retarded, basing their opinions on his decision-making ability and past work experience. 2 men from a construction company where Lee worked as a pipe fitter also testified at the hearing. The men claimed that Lee excelled at his job and was able to read blueprints, which made it difficult to believe he had such a low IQ. Following the arguments, the jury deliberated. It took only 93 minutes for them to reach a verdict. The jury rejected the defense's contention that Lee was mentally retarded and decided to sentence Lee to death by lethal injection. Family and friends of the victims rejoiced, hugged, and cried, most feeling that justice had finally been served. In December 2004, Lee was formally sentenced to death. His lawyers had asked for a new trial, claiming that the jurors were already biased towards Lee before the Pace murder trial even commenced. Defense lawyers also filed documents for a new penalty hearing because Lee was mentally retarded and should not be put to death. In addition to Pace and DeSoto, Lee has been indicted on account of first-degree murder in the death of Tanisha Dene Colomb of Lafayette and booked on first-degree murder counts in the deaths of Gina Wilson Green, Pam Kinnamore, Carrie Lynn Yoder, and Randy Meebuer, all of East Baton Rouge Parish. Yet in January 2005, Colomb's family finally decided not to put Lee on trial, since he had already been convicted and sentenced to death. As expected, Lee was not executed, and he died of heart disease at a hospital in Louisiana on January 21, 2016.